She didn't knock. She stormed in, red face, phone already recording, yelling that I was stealing HOA property. Snow. Trucks were still running behind her, dumping dirty winter snow straight onto my land like it was a trash yard. I told her to stop. She laughed and said, "This street belongs to us. You don't." Then she slapped a bright orange HOA warning on my fence and said, I had 1 hour to move the snow back or face charges. My kids were standing behind me, boots soaked, watching strangers bury our driveway. I stayed calm, not because I was weak, but because I knew something she didn't. I picked up my phone, zoomed in on the truck plates, and quietly said, "Keep dumping." Her smile faded for half a second, like she felt the ground shift but didn't know why. Then she leaned closer and whispered, "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." She made a call right in front of me and said loud enough for the whole street to hear, "Send enforcement now. He's blocking HOA operations." 10 minutes later, 2 men showed up in black jackets. No badges showing, acting like cops. One of them pointed at my snow pile and said, "I was about to be fined and removed from my own property." My neighbor started recording. Karen smirked and said, "Tow his truck too." They hooked my pickup like it was nothing. My kids started crying. That was the moment she wanted me to break. I didn't. I walked to the edge of my land, pressed a button on my phone, and the steel gate slid shut behind the snow trucks, locking their entire street in. No exit, no way around. Karen's face went white. I looked at her and said softly, "You sure this is HOA land?" She rushed to the gate and started screaming that I was trapping public vehicles and that she would have me arrested. One of the fake cops tried to pry the gate open, but it didn't move an inch. Snow trucks were stuck, engines running, drivers confused. Karen called real police this time, crying on the phone, saying I was dangerous and holding people hostage. While she talked, I opened my glove box and pulled out folded papers. Old but clean. Deeds, survey maps, county stamps. I handed copies to my neighbor and said, "This land was never part of the HOA." Karen laughed again, shaking her head, and said deeds didn't matter here. That's when one of the snow truck drivers whispered, "Ma'am, this address isn't on our route." Karen froze. I looked at her and said the line I'd been holding in all day. "You dumped your mess on the only man who can legally shut this street down." The police arrived fast, lights flashing, blocking both ends of the street. Karen ran to them first, talking fast, pointing at me like I was a criminal. She said I stole HOA snow, locked a public road, and threatened workers. One officer walked over to me and asked calmly, "Sir, is this your gate?" I nodded and handed him my ID. He looked at it twice, then stepped back. His tone changed. He asked for the papers I mentioned. I showed him the deed, the survey, and the county letter that clearly marked the street as private access through my land. Karen interrupted, yelling that I was lying. The officer raised his hand and said, "Ma'am, please stop." Then he turned to the fake cops and asked for their credentials. They couldn't answer. One tried to walk away. That's when the officer said quietly, "No one's leaving." Karen backed up slowly, whispering, "This isn't how this was supposed to go." The officers separated everyone. One cop pulled Karen aside while another walked straight to the men in black jackets. He asked again for badges. They had none. Radios were fake, the tow truck driver admitted. Karen paid cash and told them it was an emergency HOA order. That's when the officer said the word that hit her hard: impersonation. Karen started crying, saying she was just trying to keep the neighborhood safe. Then the officer asked who approved dumping snow on private land. All fingers pointed at her. I showed them the video from my cameras. Every truck, every order, every threat. The officer looked at Karen and said, "You filed a false report too." Her phone slipped from her hand. I leaned close, not smiling, and said the line she would never forget. "You tried to bury me in snow. Now you're buried in evidence." They uncuffed the truck drivers and told them to move the snow back. But not onto the street, onto Karen's own front lawn. She started yelling that they couldn't do that it was against HOA rules. The officer replied, "HOA rules don't beat county law." Another officer came up to me and asked if I wanted to press charges. I looked at Karen standing there, mud and snow already ruining her perfect grass, and said, "I want it, done the right way." That's when the officer, "Read her rights for trespassing," filing a false report, and hiring fake enforcement. Neighbors stepped out, phones up, whispering. One woman said, "She did this to my mom last year." Another man nodded and said, "To me too." Karen looked around like she was seeing the street for the first time, and realizing it was done with her, they put her in the back of the cruiser while the snow trucks finished the job she started. The street opened again, quiet this time. An officer shook my hand and said, "You handled that better than most people would." I told him I learned patience overseas and paperwork at home. He smiled like he understood. Karen's HOA notices were peeled off doors, one by one as officers warned the board members who rushed in late that night. My truck was unhooked and parked back where it belonged. My kids stopped crying and asked if we were safe now. I looked at our house, lights still warm, snow melting away, and said, "No one can push us off our land." As the cruiser pulled away, a neighbor said the line that spread fast online later. She thought she owned the street. Turns out she didn't even own the truth. By morning, the HOA board sent an email saying all emergency powers were suspended. By afternoon, a lawyer showed up asking for copies of my footage. Quietly. Karen was released later, but she didn't come home. Her house went dark. A week later, the county posted a notice at the street entrance, clear as day. Private access. No HOA authority. Neighbors waved when they passed now. Some thanked me. Some just nodded with relief. I didn't celebrate. I just rebuilt the fence, stronger than before. That night, as snow fell again, my youngest asked why that woman hated us so much. I told him some people panic when they find out they don't control everything. I stood at the gate, listening to the quiet street, and thought about one simple truth that ended it all. Freedom doesn't shout, it proves itself. End the story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more amazing HOA stories.